From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Ted Nesi. Tim White is off today, and this week we are continuing our conversations with some of the candidates running in Rhode Island's special election for Congress. Later on in the show today, we'll talk with Democratic State Rep Stephen Casey. But first, I'm pleased to welcome to the show another Democratic candidate in the race, State Senator Ana Quezada. Senator, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So we always start with the same basic question with candidates. 60 seconds or less, why do you want to be a member of Congress?
Well, I'm running for Congress because I love Rhode Island. I'm running for Congress because I understand the struggle the working family go through every single day. I'm running for Congress because it's time that Rhode Island sent a person of color, somebody who represents the diversity of Rhode Island, the first women Democrat to Congress. I'm running for Congress because we need to show the diversity Rhode Island have. And I think it's time the Rhode Island delegation show how many diversity Rhode Island have.
So there's an enormous number of issues that someone faces when they're in Congress, everything from climate change to the war in Ukraine and so many other things. What do you think, if you were sent to Washington, will be the biggest issue facing the Congress over the next few years?
Well, I believe it's many issues that we're facing. Our country is divided at this time in both parties. But one of the issues, I would say, climate change. Because if we don't have a planet, we're not going to have issues. Then climate change is one of the biggest issues we have to target. And I think the United States need to lead on that issue. But it's many other issues that we have to target. And one of them, too, is inflation. The inflation is too high for a regular Rhode Island, and we need to take a decision how we reduce inflation for people, regular people, to be able to survive.
Anything you think you'd like to see happen in Congress that could deal with inflation, help with it?
Well, there's many things, but one of them that I will work first, and I did it in Rhode Island so far, is raising the minimum wage. You cannot survive a $7.25 and a $7.25 an hour.
Which is the current federal minimum, yeah.
Exactly. Then I think we raised it in Rhode Island. I raised it in Rhode Island a few years ago to $15 an hour, but even $15 an hour is not enough for hardworking family. People need to live and a living wage, and $7.25 is not. Then that would be one of my first thing that I will work in to raise the minimum wage in the entire United States.
So let's talk honestly about the politics of this campaign. You're up against rival Democrats who have hundreds of thousands of dollars behind them. They're airing television ads. They have these powerful outside groups have endorsed them. Do you think you can actually win this primary as an underdog?
Yes, I can, definitely. If
Why?
not, I would not be here.
So you think you're in this to win it?
Yes, 100%. You don't waste any money knocking on people's doors. You don't need money to work hard. Then one of the things that I've been done, I had an excellent group of people working with me. My team is from Rhode Island. They connected in Rhode Island. And we've been working very hard to knock as many doors possible. We've been talking to people every single day from Providence to Newport, from Newport to Cumberland, and I really believe it's so many candidates. Anybody can get in. I don't believe that this one is first rate. I hope people in Rhode Island don't allow money to buy the seat, and I hope people in Rhode Island don't allow big pack to win the seat, and to look for the people who really care about Rhode Island.
Last week we had on former Providence Mayor Angel Taveras was on as one of our analysts, and he suggested the fact that 3 Latina candidates decided to run. As you said, Rhode Island has never sent any Democrats who weren't white males before to Congress. 3 Latinas all decided to run. You, Sabina Matos, Sandra Cano, could make it less likely that a Latina actually wins the seat. Was there ever any conversation among the 3 of you about uniting behind one Latina candidate to make it more likely, or do you reject that idea that you split the vote among each other?
I don't reject that idea. I think it would be, our community is growing. And this is going to continue to happen. The more people will end up running for the same position. I think it's very important to people to notice that we never before women of color was running for the position like this one. And to have 3 amazing women running for this position, I don't think we can tell a Caucasian are going to break the thing. African Americans is going to, I don't think so. I think not only Latinos going to vote for us. I think in the past, I represent a very diverse community, and all of them voted for me. Then I don't believe that I'm only reaching out to the Latino community to support us. Then I don't believe that. To be honest. That's what everybody been saying, but I do not believe that.
Yeah. So let's talk some more about the issues down in Congress. There's a big spending fight coming up, and at the center of it, one issue is the National Defense Bill and how much money should be spent on the Pentagon next year. Senator Reid just led the Senate in passing a bill that would spend $877 billion on the U.S. military over the next year. Do you support that level of Pentagon spending for next year?
I think we need to reduce it a little bit and invest that money. It's not as important that we had enough money with the biggest and more powerful country in the world. And we need to support other countries. But at the same time, we have so many issues in this country that we need to address too. And I think I would support a legislation to reduce $1 billion out of the Pentagon to be addressing other issues in the United States.
If let's say someone came, probably not as a freshman congresswoman, but let's say someone came and said, okay, we're going to take out the $1 billion like you asked for, Senator Quezada, and you can put it somewhere else. Where would you put it?
Social service. We need more social service in this country. We need to help hardworking families. We need to provide better education to our children. There's so many issues that you can put that $1 billion to work in the United States.
So another big issue right now is the Supreme Court. One of your rivals, Aaron Regenberg, says Clarence Thomas, the justice, should be impeached due to this ongoing series of revelations about trips he took with billionaires, some of whom had business before the court, et cetera. Would you support impeachment of the justice?
Yes, yes.
Why?
Well, because I think they should follow the same integrity that everybody else do. I would support that they had time limit because it's not fair that they can that he did what he did was wrong, and he should be not just impeach him. He should be out of the court.
So you say
he
impeachment
should
and removal?
Resign. Yeah,
yeah.
He should resign for that position.
Let's talk about your record in the General Assembly a little bit. You know, there's always a lot of fighting on Twitter right now as the campaign goes on. And one vote I see some of your critics resurrecting is, it's a little bit arcane, but you voted with the Senate leadership, with President Ruggiero, to keep an abortion bill a few years ago in the Judiciary Committee, rather than some people wanted to move it to the Health Committee, where they thought it would have a better chance. And some folks are saying that meant you didn't stand with those who were pushing hard to get that abortion bill across the finish line. Do you regret that vote, or do you stand by it?
I stand by it because the problem was at that time it was enough communication with Senator Valverde and why she wanted to move that bill out of the Judiciary Committee. And I wanted to have the opportunity to listen to that. Then I'm part of the Judiciary Committee. I think I voted for. I support the bill 100%. Then I do agree with that at that time when I make that decision.
So you stand by that vote
yes,
at the time,
I do.
And the reason
yes.
you did that. Have both had some controversies in recent weeks. Of course, we've heard a lot about the ballot signature fraud that Spina Matos has said was done by a vendor on her campaign. And then more recently, Aaron Regenberg has been taking criticism because his family members have funded so far $130,000 into a super PAC that's now doing mailers for him. Two different issues, of course, but as a rival candidate, do you think either of those controversies are things voters should be thinking about as they make their decision?
Yes, yes. Why not?
Why?
Well, I have to say that I know Sabina Matos for many years. I don't think Sabina broke any law. I think it's something that you can hire any vendor, and this can happen to anybody. But at the same time, I don't think she did a good job responding at the situation.
How so?
Well, I think she should have come in soon to talk about the issue. I think she should not be angry when she did the press conference, express, and take responsibility too. Because one of the things that we did, which was checking each signature before we submitted. to the border canvas. Then I was assuming that everybody else was doing the same. Then I think the same way that it wasn't maybe her whole fault, but at the same time, as you as a campaign had to take responsibility over it. I mean, any mistake your campaign does.
And then on the super PAC that Aaron Regenberg has funded, your thoughts on that?
Adam, he was the first one who pledged that everybody don't take money from super PAC. Then he was the first one, even if it's a family member or whatever. I think that was wrong. Nobody have family member who can do things like that in this race. And I think he should have took, now he's saying he didn't know. That's something I don't believe, and I'm sure many people don't believe that either.
I mentioned it earlier about the amount of money behind. We just talked about that super PAC for Aaron Regenberg. I think the Bold PAC has now spent $400,000 for Sabina Matos. Might have more money coming in. I guess as a candidate, what's it feel like to be running a campaign that just has a lot less? Do you feel swamped by that amount of money around you as you're trying? You said knocking doors and trying to do more of a grassroots thing. I mean, how does it feel day to day as you campaign with that, being up against that?
Well, I hope the people who voting in this election don't allow the big corporation or big PAC buy this seat. I think they need to find who was the person who been working on the issues for so long and who would be working on issues and representing hardworking family in Rhode Island. Don't allow, I want to bring Rhode Island to Washington, not Washington to Rhode Island. And I think that's what they're doing, bringing all this money. They want to buy a seat for Washington, and we should not allow that to happen.
Let's talk about the man you would replace if you win this seat, David Cicilline. I'm sure you interacted with him over the years as a member of the General Assembly. How do you think he did as a member of Congress, and what would you do differently in this seat from what he did, if anything?
Well, I know David for many, many years. We worked very hard in each of his campaigns. And one of the reasons I'm here, David played a big role. I think he did a great job, and I'm sure it's a big feat for us. It's a big shoes for us to fill. But I think anybody who wins this race will continue the great work that David Cicilline did when he was in Congress.
All right, State Senator Ana Quezada, that's all the time we have in this segment. Democratic candidate for Congress. Thank you for joining me. And on the second half of the show, we're going to be talking with Democratic State Representative Stephen Casey about his campaign for the Democratic nomination for Congress. We'll continue this conversation. Stay with us on Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Ted Nesi. Tim White is off this week, and we're continuing our series of conversations with the Democratic candidates for the special election for Congress in Rhode Island's 1st District. I'm joined now by State Representative Stephen Casey. Rep, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I'm going to start you off. The question everybody gets, 60 seconds or less. Why do you want to be a member of Congress?
Well, I want to be a member of Congress to serve the people, but I think what the people are looking for is somebody that they can trust. As an Eagle Scout and a Freemason, the tenets of these organizations are based on trust, loyalty, brotherhood. I believe that the people of Rhode Island can trust me to do that. I also believe that we need strong leadership, and my leadership experience compared to the rest of the field is unmatched. I've held positions in the State House. During the pandemic, the Speaker entrusted me with the Health and Human Services Committee, where we passed bold legislation to address the needs of the people, increasing the telemedicine access for people to be able to take care of themselves. But at the same time, we took care of business in Rhode Island. We were able to keep manufacturing open. We basically had a program set up by the Commerce Department to allow for technical assistance for small businesses to get EIDL loans as well as the PPP loans, and they didn't know how to do that, so we were able to do that. Then during the housing crisis, the Speaker entrusted me once again to take care of the Municipal Government and Housing Committee. We passed some very bold legislation to increase production and the timing of low to moderate income housing. And I think, really, I've been in the house of every Rhode Islander as an EMT and a firefighter, and I really understand how people are struggling, how they're struggling to live. So for me, I believe I know what the Rhode Islanders want, but I'm a person that's going to ask them what they want, and they can tell me, and we can lead from there.
And I think, respectfully, I think this is a show I have two underdogs with me compared with some of these candidates who have so much money, as I mentioned with Senator Quezada. And so, same question to you. Can you win this race when you're up against people who have, six-figure super PACs and these other PACs coming in for them, and they've raised all this money? How do you do it?
Well, for me, politics has always been grassroots. I'm a person that goes out and shakes hands with people, but my my support base is very strong. I've got support from the manufacturing community, from the large manufacturers, as well as from all of the first responder groups throughout the state. The Rhode Island Association of Firefighters, the State Fraternal Order of Police, the Rhode Island Brotherhood of Correction, and obviously the International Association of Firefighters. So I've been able to basically bridge those gaps. It's uncommon, and I believe it's historical that a union employee has such backing from the business community as well. But I think also we have to look at, it's still a family and friends grassroots campaign. I don't have a lot of money. I don't have outside interests giving me money. I don't have Bernie Sanders coming down and endorsing me, or Jane Fonda. So, and nor do I want their endorsement. So what the situation is with that is, I've been working with my family. My dad and I went out and got our signatures together at the supermarket. We pounded the pavement, and I believe there's, and I had a local, what I call a signature party, to get people to come down, shake hands, have dinner, and just relax, sign our papers. So we're doing things from a community base, and I think that's old style politics, and that's what you're going to get from me. It's
also interesting to me because geographically, you're the only candidate coming out of Woonsocket in that part of the district. Yep. Do you feel like that could be helpful to you, that you know a corner of the, we have a bunch of candidates from the same places in other parts of the district. You've got a geography that's more your own.
I think geography has a lot to do with it, but I think it's ideology as well. I think people understand I'm the moderate candidate. I set myself apart from everybody else in that respect, and I believe Rhode Island has a yearning for some moderation, and I think that's what's really important.
Well, and let's talk about that, because that's it's actually easier to interview someone who has slightly different views than the rest of the field, because there's so much agreement in this.
All the other candidates are the same
in this race, right? So let's go right to it. One of those issues, abortion, is an issue where you have a different point of view from some of your rivals. Do you think, as some have proposed, the federal government should put in an abortion ban at the 15-week marks, as some are pushing for?
Well, that's a discussion that we can have. I'm an EMT firefighter. I'm an Eagle Scout. As in my job, I save people's lives. I think that when you're talking about late-term abortions, I have a major issue with that. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not going to overturn Roe versus Wade. I'm a constitutionalist, and I believe everybody has the right to govern what happens.
Well, it's already
with
been overturned.
Well, I'm not going to support that, okay? But I believe that I'm a constitutionalist. I believe everybody has the right to govern themselves and do what they need to do with their own body. When we come to late-term abortions, I do have issue with that. I've assisted in the birth of premature babies in a rescue. They come out gasping for air, and I believe that that's we need to approach this in a really a really sensitive manner. But I have a cousin that had a baby at 25 weeks gestation, and 2 years later that baby is normal. She fought for 18 months of her life, but she is normal, thriving, and beautiful.
So I think in some of the discussion around your views, people suggested you're a full-on pro-lifer. I know that these distinctions can be hard to pin down, but you support what was in place under Roe versus Wade then?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Let's talk about another issue like that, guns. Do you think federal gun laws currently too strict, too lax, or about right?
I think federal gun laws right now are about right. I think what we need to do is we need to pass legislation or look at legislation that's going to take care of the problems that we're actually facing, which is illegal guns on the street. These are the type of things that everybody says if we ban all the guns, it's not going to do anything for us now. And the other issue is we're concerned about school shootings. So we need to look at President Biden's bipartisan legislation with the Safer Communities Act. I think that approaches this problem in the right way. We need to approach things from getting illegal guns off the street. We need to approach resources for schools, and we really need to approach mental health as an issue. Okay, mental health is the #1 cause of these shootings and school shootings. Perfectly sane people do not go in and commit crimes on anybody in any location.
So, as we talk about those issues, bigger picture, clearly the Democratic Party has moved to the left on the national level, at least, over the last decade or two. Many people who are more moderate have either left the Democratic Party, maybe become independents, particularly elected officials, if they weren't comfortable with that. You've remained a Democrat. Why are you still a Democrat when some of where the party is going is different from your views on things?
I still believe in the Democratic Party. I think some people would term me as your old style John Kennedy. I'm my dad's Democrat, and I have views. I don't want to leave the party, and I think that's the problem right now. Is we have a polarization, #1 within the party, and #2 nationally, and that's the problem with politics in itself right now. we need to really bring people together. I think I've been able to do that at the State House level, working across the aisle on certain legislation. But I believe that our country needs to come together. We've been too divided. I think the polarization between the extreme left and extreme left is the problem. That's why we can't move forward. I believe I'm one of the people that can cross that bridge and create a the term I use is, let's agree on what we can agree on and work from there. Let's not just let our extreme views keep us apart from each other. I think we're just holding the country back.
Who's a Democrat in Congress right now you admire?
Well, personally, I admire everyone. Because I don't...
Every single Democrat in Congress?
Well, here's the thing. I respect everybody's opinion,
okay.
And that's the difference. I'm going to stand there. I'm going to go talk to the people on the squad. I know I'm going to run into that situation. I'm going to talk to them. I want to know their views. I want to understand how they think. I think that what we need to do also is, on a human level, understand people first. If we can't be friends first and agree to disagree on certain things, then we're not going to get anywhere. Too many times in politics here in the state, if people don't agree with you, they're going the other way. You're dead to them. And that's not the way we need to do things. We really need to get together. So when you talk about admiring people, I think everybody, just to put yourself out there and run for office and be in politics, it's extremely difficult. Your life is not private anymore, and that's one of the major things that's an issue. But to be able to give your life or give a part of your life to politics to make things better, I think that's honorable. So I appreciate everyone.
I asked Senator Quezada about her record at the State House. A question for you on yours. There was a bill you introduced this session that drew some criticism. As you mentioned, endorsed by the Firefighters Union and involved in that world yourself. You filed a bill that would have made firefighters eligible for a disability pension if they have PTSD.
Correct.
And the Journal has reported that in other states there were allegations that option had been abused and had maybe led to people getting it who shouldn't, or it cost more than expected. Did you take that into account when you introduced the bill?
Yes, I did. And first, we're going to refer to it as post-traumatic stress injury because it's not a disorder. And my concern with the way that things are is people need to look at the situation. As a fireman, as a first responder, you witness things over a period of time. It's not one specific incident that could give you a problem. We do have programs that allow you to get help and to understand, so you can work through your problems. If there are issues that will take you beyond that situation where you cannot return to work, you have to have 3 doctors to approve it. This is not something where everybody says, well, I had a bad day and I want to get a pension. And that's how it was portrayed in the press, and it's unfortunate. And none of the press people that actually wrote articles called me up to ask me about it.
Well, did you see, were there differences in your bill from what we saw in, I think, was it Minnesota or Wisconsin? Somewhere else that had passed this where there was really allegations of abuse of the system?
Well, it's quite possible. I think in any system, there's always some bad actors, and there's always people that try to manipulate the system. So, when you talk about abuse, there's no way we should make it easy. Every bill, every piece of legislation, when we talk about municipal expenses, should have guardrails on it. It should have a rebuttable clause where the municipality can come back and fight against that. But I think there are possibilities that this will come about next year. We just recently had two recently in Rhode Island. Unfortunately, suicides in the first responding community.
Sad to hear that. Let's pivot back to the race for Congress.
Yes.
I mentioned in the first half the controversies around both Sabina Montos and Aaron Regenberg. I won't rehash it again. The signature scandal for her, the super PAC for him. Your reaction to those two controversies as a rival?
My reaction, I'm not surprised that there are controversies. I think that everybody's doing everything they can to win this race. Unfortunately, that gets you into a situation where there are things that may or may not happen that you may or may not know about. And I think it's unfortunate that politics has to be that way. With the signature issue, like I said, I went out with my dad. My dad's 79 years old. When I was a kid, he was in politics. I used to go shake hands and do the thing and pass out leaflets and stand in the rain at the polls for him. Now he's doing that with me. So the distraction for everybody else, that's fine. I think it just creates a trust issue for those quote-unquote leading candidates, and the people will decide on that. But for me, this has been like the greatest experience. I'm spending the summer with my dad. He's 79. He couldn't be happier to be doing this with me, and I think it's just a great opportunity.
So you don't mind being the underdog?
Well, you'll call me the underdog. I don't mind being in this race. Let me tell you that.
That's how you're putting it. All right. Let me ask you what I asked Senator Quezada about the defense bill. Jack Reed's biggest job of the year, putting through I think it's about $877 billion. Do you think that's the right amount to spend on the Pentagon in the coming year?
I think it is. We need to remain a superpower so that we can defend and promote democracy throughout the world. And the defense spending, I don't know if anybody, my opponents don't know this, but 10% of Rhode Island economy is defense economy. We have major corporations here that do a lot of great work for the defense industry, and there's another 1,200 businesses that on the back end of that support that industry in some way. It's a very big, and it's very quiet, but it's a very big part of the Rhode Island economy. All
right, State Representative Stephen Casey, Democratic candidate for Congress. That's all the time we have right now. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Ted. I appreciate it.
Thanks to all of you for being here with me. As I said, Tim White is off this week, but he'll be back next week as we continue gearing up for the special election. Remember, early voting, believe it or not, starts on Wednesday. You can go down and cast your ballot if you want to do that. And we have complete coverage of the 1st District race on WPRI.com. I'll see you back here next week on Newsmakers.